So if you think things are wild and crazy in your hometown, maybe not. In 1911, this gentleman here, Charles Sollars, he was a 52-year-old businessman. He owned the Lodi Soda Works. He was shot to death by the newspaper publisher in town. It's a crazy story, and I'll tell you about it on this episode of History Hunters. So I'm going to start out this story at the Lodi Memorial Park. This is the grave plot for the Sollars family. As you can tell, they've got a very nice marker here. It's been engraved with some scrolling on it. As a frame of reference, that's where the mausoleum is. So he's out here. Charles was brought to his early grave by Samuel Axtell, who was the Lodi newspaper publisher. Charles Sollars, 1859 to 1911. He is buried next to his widow, Anna Sollars, 1860 to 1922. So she lasted 11 years past her husband's death. And they had their share of tragedy, because here's their son, C. Walter Sollars, 1880 to 1889. Didn't live very long, did he? And then we have another infant child who died before him, 1885. The tragedy marked this entire family's existence on the planet. A very sad story. When I watch TV, I watch a lot of homicide shows. I'm particularly fascinated on how police solve homicides. And quite often the murders take place after just stupid things happen between two people. It's always better when cooler heads prevail, but a lot of times they just let their anger get the best of them, and it leads to murder, and it leads to broken lives of family members. This is one of those stories. There's no reason for the death of this young man that's buried right here. Charles Sollars died way too young. He was only 52. Very successful guy. He owned some property. He also owned his own business here in Lodi. Now, how this whole feud started is open to debate. One version that I read stated that Sollars went to Axtell, the Lodi Sentinel, for a print job. As you know, newspapers would often do supplemental printing to supplement their income. And apparently Axtell was not able to process the print job in time, so Sollars took it to a competing newspaper that Axtell hated. And that really pissed off his neighbor. They lived side by side, or lived across the street from one another. The houses there are gone. It's now the Civic Center. They were too close to each other, apparently.
I wanted to see the site where the Emerson School was located, since it factored into the drama that led to Sollars' murder. The school was located here from the time it was built in 1907 until it was leveled in 1955. The school grounds became Emerson Park. It was here where two young female teachers named Johnson and McKinley were employed. One newspaper article reported that Axtell and his wife Clara were boarding at a house where Miss McKinley was also living. On June 10, 1911, Axtell loaned his Heinz automobile so the two women could drive to Stockton. Whoever was driving the car came upon a hay wagon too fast and steered the car into a canal to avoid hitting it. As fate would have it, coming upon the crash near Stockton was Charles Sollars and wife Anna, who offered help. The incident churned up the gossip mill in Lodi. It was considered inappropriate in 1911 for unmarried women to be out on their own without a man, and people also began speculating as to why Axtell loaned his car to the young women. The crash made its way onto the pages of the Stockton Mail newspaper with rumors of a joyride with Axtell's car. Although Axtell wasn't in the car, salacious rumors swirled of an inappropriate relationship between them. Axtell was convinced that Sollars leaked the story to the Stockton Mail and became livid. Axtell despised both Sollars and the Stockton Mail, which lit the fuse in Axtell's anger. During the trial, some testified that Sollars did not pass on the story to the newspaper. When Axtell's newspaper didn't cover the crash, possibly to protect the teachers' reputations, the community smelled a cover-up, which fed into more rumors.
So I've come down here to Pine Street in Lodi because this is where the scene of the crime occurred, right across the street. So it's not here right now, but the shooting took place at a garage. Sollars pulled in. It said right next to the alley here between Sacramento and School Street, so it would be this location right here. It was 10 a.m. on Friday, June 16th, 1911. Axtell's wrath bore down full force on his despised neighbor. Sollars was having trouble with his Jackson automobile and pulled into the Lodi garage to be in the shade to check it out. Again, it's summer. As Charlie was leaning over the engine of his vehicle, Sam walked up behind him, stood 6 feet away, and fired 3 shots with a .22 Colt without uttering a single word. The 2 bullets hit Charlie, who straightened up and ran from the garage over to the bank across the street, which is right over there. They were through and through shots exiting his stomach, and he began yelling, "My God, I am shot, I am killed." Axtell was running after him, but he was held back by 2 men who knew him, and they wrestled the gun away from him. Sollars bled all the way across the street to the front of the bank, where he staggered inside and collapsed into the arms of a Mr. Lorenz. He was loaded up in a car and driven to a Dr. Nelson, but he died the next morning from his wounds. I have no idea where the garage was, but it was in this area. Now, I saw earlier on Google Earth that there was a garage right here, so I'm not sure if this is where the shooting took place, but check out the side of the building. That's pretty cool. It's pretty old.
Initially, I believed that the Lodi garage where the shooting took place was located on the east side of the alley. But after my visit, I found a newspaper photo that gave me a new clue about location. The photo is dark and muddled, but the building next to it appears to be the same one on Pine Street, only in reverse. My theory works if you assume that the newspaper inadvertently flipped the negative and printed the photo the wrong way. That would have made the Lodi garage on the alley's west side, where this Google Street View shows evidence of an old slab for a building.
Sarah and I have actually been here before because this is where the A&W root beer stand was first invented. In fact, there's a plaque on the sidewalk here. There. If you want to check out that episode, but Sollars would have been running and screaming across here, bleeding all the way across the street. Apparently he went to the bank because he knew somebody in there, or he was familiar with it. I can imagine that Axel was probably apprehended right in this area. Can't imagine a shot man running across the street here in pain and bewilderment and just wondering what the heck. I mean, I've never been shot, but I can imagine it's a very bad experience. This is the original bank. This is where it happened, 1911. Sollars staggered into this building right here and collapsed into the arms of Mr. Lorenz. Very cool bank building still here. Now what's interesting is that the bank building is right here and the Lodi Arch is right here. It was here during the shooting, so Mr. Sollars would have known about it. It says it was designed and built in 1907 for the Lodi Tokay Carnival. It served as an entrance into Lodi and a symbol of agriculture and commercial growth. So yeah, it's a historical artifact. In fact, they just fixed the bear up there, the golden bear. I'm always excited to see old buildings like this with the old advertising still painted on the side. This one is still in place. Bull Durham, King of Tobacco, male pouch, I think it says, and then lasting chew. The bottom half of that sign is still pretty good shape, and below it says Enterprise Plug Cut Smokes. Cool, and it trails off. That's a cool building. This is the type of garages that existed back in the day, and this is probably the type of garage that Mr. Sollars parked his car in. We are told that Mr. Axtell and Mr. Sollars were neighbors. Apparently they lived across the street from one another, which allowed Mr. Axtell to keep his eye on his archenemy. It was the 209 Elm Street is where Sollars lived. I'm going to have to show you what kind of houses were here because the actual houses were eliminated for the Civic Center. So we are in the 400 block, and you can kind of get a feel for the type of housing that was here. And as you can see, the bungalow type houses that were here were in the 400 block. Mr. Sollars' house would have been probably similar to these right here. They're beautiful old houses. I think it's kind of creepy that you would have a neighbor hating you so much and keeping his eye on you that he would follow you out of his garage. Beautiful house. This is 403 West Elm. And here is the Superior Court, Lodi branch, 315 West Elm. This is where the 200 block would have started right here. So it's actually a courthouse right now where Mr. Sollars' house was. And it's quite plausible that Mr. Axtell lived across the street there, which is now the Parks and Recreation and Cultural Services building. It's too bad because I wanted to highlight the homes where these two gentlemen lived. If you're disappointed that the houses aren't here, I agree. I'm disappointed too, but that's the way it goes. Progress wiped out the whole block.
Axtell was a nephew of the late famous politician also named Samuel Axtell, who was the territorial governor of Utah and New Mexico, and also a U.S. congressman. Sam Axtell was born in Woodbridge, a community near Lodi, and attended Woodbridge College. He began managing the Lodi Sentinel in 1893 for the founding owners, the Ellis family. He purchased the newspaper on July 1st, 1901. During his nearly 10 years as owner and editor, Axtell saw electricity installed in the office in 1904 and began offering newspaper delivery by carrier in 1909. Axtell editorialized for moral reform and helped make Lodi a dry city with no liquor sold on Sundays. His newspaper also advocated for Lodi to be incorporated as a city in 1906. Axtell was described as a highly strung personality who had little concern about being sued for libel, as he called a spade a spade. His colorful brand of reporting got him into trouble with Charles Sollars, the 52-year-old owner of the Lodi Soda Works. The two were neighbors and didn't like each other and had a long-standing feud which started in 1900 and continued for 11 years. One time in print, Axel had denounced Sollars for getting the school board to call a school holiday for a picnic, allegedly only to make money on soda sales. In the competing newspaper in town, Sollars answered Axtell's charges with an air of comedy and thus began the feud. Charlie, though, seemed to take it with a grain of salt. Things got so bad between the two that town fathers came into Axtell's office to pressure him to end the public feud with Sollars. Things settled down for a time. Being that Lodi was a small city of about 2,000 residents, the two businessmen could hardly avoid bumping into one another. This next part seems odd to me because Axtell had lunch at the Stockton Hotel with Constable Floyd and an attorney before taking him to jail in Stockton. On the sidewalk, Axtell ran into his brother-in-law, Fred Kettleman, and confessed that he couldn't stand the strains of the scandal, and he snapped. When Axtell heard that Sollars had passed away, he replied, "Well, there's no use in denying it. I aim to kill him." Not surprisingly, the next day, Axtell's Lodi Sentinel buried the murder on page 2 with a 3-inch story. 6 days after the arrest, the Lodi Sentinel announced the sale of the newspaper to editor George Moore and advertising director Forrest Roper. It's believed that Axtell sold the newspaper because he knew he was going to prison and to come up with some funds to hire a lawyer. On October 24, 1911, Axtell's murder trial in Stockton began. The Sentinel's new owners covered this sensational trial on the front page. A total of 296 prospective jurors had to be questioned before a full jury, whose members did not know either Axtell or Sollars, could be seated. Testimony began on October 6, 1911, with the prosecution calling a parade of 70 people to testify. The defense attorneys tried the insanity defense, which was rare back then. Many of those who took the stand had witnessed encounters of the two prominent business people, while some saw the crime itself. Many on the stand attested to Axtell's state of mind. One witness was asked if he was aware that Axtell experienced hallucinations. His reply was yes, he thinks he's a great man and he has 150 neckties. Among us Lodi farmers, we think that is insanity. Someone testified that Sam was run over by a hay rake when he was a kid, which scared him badly, and it was suggested this may have had an effect on him mentally as well. On November 25, 1911, the jury deliberated for 4 hours and found Axtell guilty of first-degree murder. 5 days later, he was sentenced to life in prison. The conviction so upset his sister, Belle Culp, so much that she attempted suicide by taking poison. She must have succeeded because she died December 10th, 1911, and is buried in the Woodbridge Masonic Cemetery. On December 5th, 1911, the Newspaperman was taken to Folsom Prison. Years later, he was paroled, then sold his Lodi property, and he and wife Clara moved to La Jolla near San Diego. On Friday, June 30th, 1933, the 63-year-old Sam Axtell was getting a haircut inside of a San Diego barber shop when he was stricken with a fatal heart attack. Clara had him interred at the Cypress View Mausoleum in San Diego. They are having some kind of Day of the Dead celebration here at the cemetery. So there's music playing at it, and probably going to have a copyright strike, so I'm going to have to do a voiceover on this one. But I need to find the grave of Clara May Axtell. She was the wife of Samuel Axtell, the villain in our story. Clara Kettleman Axtell lived for another 16 years until July 13, 1949. Her parents, Daniel Kettleman and wife Margaret, are also buried here in the same cemetery. I suspect that Axtell was not buried in Lodi, where Clara is today, because he was despised there for killing Sollars. So I found the grave of David and Margaret Kettleman. They were the parents of Clara Axtell, who was Sam's wife. Kettleman, who drove a herd of cattle from Missouri to California in 1849, just before the gold rush. The pioneer residents first settled in the area around Coalinga, where the Kettleman Hills were named in their honor. The spelling got changed from Kettel to Kettle when the town was named. The family then moved to Lodi to rear their family. Kettleman Lane, which is the southern boundary line of Lodi city limits, was also named for this family. So from the neighborhood of Mr. Axtell and Mr. Sollars, I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of History Hunters. Let us know what you thought. Give us a thumbs up if you can. And we always appreciate you subscribing to History Hunters. Thanks so much.